Hi everyone, we are now in Module 5, and this module actually covers two different chapters, Chapter 5 and 6. I'm going to just be recording one video today, even though I split up the PowerPoints for you, but this basically is just easier for me to do it in one video, so that's why you're only going to see the one. But we're going to go ahead and start with Chapter 5. As you can see, we're again building on that pyramid, right? The interviewing skills pyramid. And I want to say at this point, you might be thinking, why are we talking about interviewing? The focus of everything is interviewing, but aren't we doing counseling? And yes, that is true. I often think of when I'm writing these PowerPoints up, why is it that the focus is interviewing so much? And given that a lot of you have experience in the field in one way or another, it might seem like interviewing is kind of the first stage to counseling, and that is true as well. But in the same way that we think about interviewing and the types of questions that we're asking in an interview, all of this transfers over into a counseling session as well. It's just a matter of terminology, interviewing versus counseling, right? So what we are looking at in Chapter 5 is questions. And isn't it crazy that there's an entire chapter dedicated to how we ask questions as a counselor? And it's really important that we start to consider how we are asking questions in our personal life when we're speaking with friends, family members, significant others, children, whoever it might be, and that we are kind of hyper-analyzing our style of questioning, because it's important that we're using the right types of questions when we're working with counselors, because you can't take questions out of the equation. You might have those clients that are just ready to sit down in front of you, spill their beans. You don't have to say anything. But really, even for those clients that are prone to oversharing, providing you with all the information that you might need, questioning still helps you narrow down what it is that the focus of that counseling session is, what the goals of the session are, what the goals long-term are, and the progress that somebody has made. So, remember that typically we're looking at like a 50-minute counseling session, maybe longer depending on the client need and the setting and all of that. But typically we're looking at like a 50-minute to hour-long session with the client. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that short amount of time. And it's our job to help guide and direct the client on the right track of the conversation, to get on the right track with the conversation, so that you're actually facilitating some work, so that you're able to see that you are reaching benchmarks or hitting goals that you've pre-established with the client. So there's two basic styles of questions: open-ended questions and closed-ended questions. And you're going to hear a lot about this moving forward. We're going to talk about it when you come on campus for your immersion week. It's something that really, whenever I am looking at you role-playing with others, and for you all, nicely, you get the avatars that you guys will be role-playing with during this semester's immersion week. But open-ended versus closed-ended questions are those things that we're looking at, especially in this particular class. We're hoping that you're asking more open-ended questions than closed-ended questions as you progress in your skill development. So open-ended questions encourage clients to talk. These typically start with the what, how, why, when type questions. Could and would are open-ended questions, but if you think about how questions that start with could or would are asked, technically you could answer that you could answer them with a yes or no. Your clients could answer them with a yes or no. Could you tell me about a time whenever you felt happier? Nope, can't tell you about that. So you can't answer those with a yes or no, but generally speaking, they open up conversation a little bit further. Closed-ended questions are the ones that can most certainly be answered with a yes or no. They typically start with did, do, is, are, and you could try it out, test this one out. I always encourage students to do that. Test it out, start a conversation, ask a bunch of closed-ended questions, see how far you go, how far you get in terms of developing an understanding of what the issue of that person is that you're talking with. Closed-ended questions will just take you in a circle. Around and around and around you go, asking those closed-ended questions. But closed-ended questions in terms of probing for information, and we'll learn more about probing as we move forward in this semester, but getting a bit more detailed about a client's story, about the issue at hand. Sometimes closed-ended questions are beneficial. sometimes closed-ended questions are more useful for certain populations, maybe working with a child, somebody with an intellectual disability. Sometimes closed-ended questions can be useful. So it's not that anybody is saying don't do it. And remember, that's always going to be my answer. When do you ask these questions? It depends. How do you ask them? It depends. Who do you ask them to? It depends. So I never want anybody to think that there's a concrete, typically a concrete, we do use this or we don't use that. It's because sometimes the things that we're taught not to use, or it's just that I'm trying to teach you to not use them as frequently, right? Sometimes it's warranted, a lot of times it's not. So start asking these open-ended questions, and you'll start to see that it really starts to facilitate a conversation. You get a little bit more in depth about what a person's talking about. So in the next slide, where am I at? Like slide 3 here for chapter 5, we're talking about open-ended questions, some examples of that. The problem with questions, again, questions are part of the counseling process. We have to ask questions. What we aren't doing, or what we shouldn't be doing, is asking questions in the wrong way, in the wrong style, those closed-ended questions, asking questions that aren't pertinent, that don't matter really, that the answer doesn't matter, or asking questions that mean nothing to the client. Clients may feel like they're under investigation. We're not shining the light on them. We're not detectives in the work that we're due. This is a process of inquiry, of thoughtful inquiry into another human being's life. And so we are asking questions respectfully. What I have found is that students that are new to all of this, the whole process of counseling, it's easy to ask a lot of questions. It's harder to do the summarizations and the reflections of feelings and content and paraphrasing. It's easier to ask questions. And so what is typical and common, I honestly would expect at this developmental stage for you guys, is that when you work with other people, when you're doing role plays, that you're going to be question. What I think a good pattern is, that somebody else taught me, honestly, is that you could ask a question, paraphrase, summarize, paraphrase, summarize, whichever one makes sense at the moment, paraphrase, summarize again, and then ask another question. So one question for every 2 to 3 paraphrases or summarizations or reflections of feeling. So it can be a good habit just to limit that. Also, it's more natural for us to ask 2 to 3 questions in one sentence, if you will, while we're talking to somebody, or asking questions that might be leading. So, questions like, well, don't you think you could have done that better? That's a leading question. Somebody's going to say, well, yeah, probably I could have done that better. But what, you do want to be feeling is, or asking is, what do you think could have been done differently? Or is there anything that you would have done differently? How would you have addressed that situation? If you were working on these things that we're working on, how did that situation work out for you? How did it go? Things like that. So you don't want to be asking leading questions. Different cultures respond to questions in different ways. Again, especially the rapid fire type questioning, somebody's going to feel like they're under attack. If their questions aren't on track with the client's goals, then they're going to kind of wonder, why in the world is this person asking me this question that doesn't matter? If you're there and you're working with a client on finding a new job, for example, so somebody's going into vocational rehabilitation. So you're there doing kind of career development, job placement work, career exploration type work, and all of a sudden you're asking about I'm trying to think, I'm like really stretching here, about that person's shopping habits. Okay, that is probably not going to be related to the career goal. Even if you're just trying to figure out what a client's preferred income range might be, you're still not really needing to know anything about their shopping habits. So I don't know if that was a great example or not, but and you don't want to be judgmental, certainly, with any clients, in the way that we can ask questions, the tone, inflection, things of that nature, that can sometimes be interpreted as judgment. Questions with less verbal clients. I don't want to say non-verbal clients, though we do work with clients that are non-verbal. So it just, well, obviously it runs the spectrum here. But sometimes with clients, you might need to build a little bit more rapport. You might need to kind of be okay and sitting with some randomness if the responses aren't clear or connected. It's kind of our job to put those puzzle pieces together a little bit. And less clients who are less verbal, again, this could be individuals that have that are younger and by way of a developmental disability might not be as verbal, or maybe maybe communicating in a different way. It may be individuals that have sustained a traumatic brain injury or have a different type of disability or residual effects from a medical condition. So there are all kinds of reasons why somebody might not be as open or as verbal. So, it can be helpful to search for some of the concrete or specific facts, feelings, and the facts kind of, can be useful again in helping us to understand what's going on with the client's story. Asking what else is a great question if you feel like you're stuck, if you feel like there's probably more to a client's story, if you feel like there's something they might not be fully telling you. Just that simple 2-word question, what else? Not, is there anything else? Because that's a closed-ended question, right? Just leaving it at what else? It's leaving that time open for your client to fill in the blanks. Practicing silence. I feel like I mentioned this already, but sometimes I feel like I'm a broken record depending on the class, but practicing silence is really important. If you are uncomfortable with silence, as a lot of people are, you have to practice it now rather than the first time you meet with an actual human being client. So start practicing silence again in your own personal life. When you're asking any type of question, open-ended question, something like what else, count to 10. That's kind of the way that I would start to practice silence. Or if you're really uncomfortable with silence, start with counting to 5 in your head, not out loud. Please, goodness, don't start counting out loud to your clients or people, but counting your head to 5. And then continue to try to increase that number. A lot of work can be done in silence, especially for our clients, even for ourselves. Work is being done in silence. People are thinking, the wheels are turning, the gears are moving. So allow somebody to sit in silence. Allow yourself to sit in silence in that one-on-one meeting with a client or a family, whoever it might be, because it can be meaningful. But counting to 5 is the baseline. Try to move your way up to 10. Typically by that point, a client might feel more inclined to actually speak up or say something because they also likely don't enjoy sitting there in silence. It's a cultural thing for us in America. We don't like to just sit there and not do anything or say anything. So in slide 7, again, some ways that asking those first words, what, why, how, what types of response they're going to be eliciting, facts or information, reasons, etc. So thinking about specific theoretical orientations. Now I know we haven't really gone into depth with theoretical orientations. Again, I'm trying to build you guys up to that point, and we'll do more about theoretical orientations when you're on campus. Cognitive therapy is kind of one of the earlier forms of a therapeutic approach after psychoanalysis and humanistic counseling. Those are kind of forces in counseling, but cognitive behavioral therapy, more specifically, is something that is widely used in the counseling profession. A lot of evidence-based support for the use of CBT and working with clients from all different backgrounds, with all different diagnoses and reasons for seeking services. Cognitive therapy, and Carl Rogers was the guy that developed cognitive therapy. He really didn't like questioning. He didn't like it at all, and he would try to refrain from questioning. He was more about allowing a relationship to develop from just showing that unconditional positive regard and summarizing and reflecting of feeling to a client, and he strayed away from questioning. The way that this has kind of moved forward into postmodern times is that there's certain ways that that we are accessing what's called client self-talk, what they're saying to themselves in that moment or whenever an event was happening, that help, again, to facilitate movement of whatever the story might be. So there's some examples of that on slide 8. Slide 9, I wanted to provide some examples of what solution-focused therapy, again, another theoretical orientation. Solution-focused therapy is one that I identify with in terms of my theoretical orientation. And so as it would appear, we're looking for solutions here, right, with solution-focused therapy. And so we're asking clients for exceptions to their rules, exceptions to times when things that they thought could never happen actually did happen. We might be asking scaling questions to gauge where a client might be in their emotions, their feelings, progress towards a goal, whatever it might be. So there's some examples of that on slide 9. Reality therapy is really kind of bringing awareness to a client's here and now and so on slide 10 and 11, it looks like, because and 12, look at that, I provided 3 here for you on reality therapy. And some of these I have found, and it seems to be true, a lot of the ways that we ask questions are going to depend on our theoretical orientation. The frequency at which we ask questions depends on our theoretical orientation. The reasons why we ask questions is going to depend on our theoretical orientation. But cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused reality therapy are pretty common types of therapeutic approaches. Things like motivational interviewing pull from these theoretical orientations too, and that's a more popular one, as well as positive psychology. And the video that you guys are going to be watching after my presentations is a positive psychology based video, and so you're going to see like a little chart that comes up that's focused on positive psychology, the foundations of positive psychology. I don't want you to worry as much about that, but positive psychology is really strength-based, and so we're always asking questions that are focused on a client's strengths, what they're able to do rather than inability, how they're doing well versus how they're not doing well, how they're reaching goals rather than how they're not meeting goals. So a little bit of a difference there. But I want you to focus on how the counselor in that video is asking questions, how the counselor is reflecting and summarizing and paraphrasing back to the client that he is working with. So I'm going to take a second and switch my PowerPoints here to chapter 6, where we are talking about encouraging, paraphrasing, and summarizing. So the purpose of encouraging, again, now that we are out of like the medical model in terms of how we approach our work with people, meaning that we're not focused on fixing somebody, we're not focused on prescribing things so that somebody can get out of our office. We are more humanistic in our approach. We understand the influence of society and one's environment on how they identify and how they are presenting with whatever the problem might be. So in terms of encouraging, it doesn't matter what theoretical orientation you are working from, we are always encouraging our clients, right? And the way that we speak to our clients helps to show them that we are encouraging as counselors, that we want the best, that we are empathetic to their situation. We might not be sympathetic because we've never been there before. We can't have the same lived experience as our clients. We might have similar lived experiences, right? Because sometimes we get into this field because things have happened to us that were meaningful, and maybe we saw a counselor and it really helped us, and so we have our own personal experiences, but we can never know exactly how a client has been affected by their experiences because they are theirs, right? So we can be empathetic to our clients. We can have an understanding of their worldview and be open to listening to how that has impacted them. And so encouraging a client, that comes through some of those nonverbal behaviors that we're doing, nodding our head, acting engaged, listening, showing that we're listening, using positive facial expressions, using minimal verbals, I understand, not doing that the entire time, because you don't want a counselor that's sitting across from you just going, yeah, right, I get it, I understand, for an entire 50 minutes. That would be frustrating, right? So You can repeat keywords from statements that the clients are saying if they're, using certain cultural terms potentially. If they just keep coming back to the word like angry, 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 frustrated, frustrated, frustrated. Sometimes you can pick up on those words and use those words so that you're showing that you're engaged in that person's conversation and the way that they are speaking about an issue. When we think about dimensions of paraphrasing, and if we think about paraphrasing and versus summarizing, okay, so they're two different things. When we are using paraphrasing, typically that's going to go on kind of throughout a counseling session. Whenever we're working with a client, we're going to not let the client might say one or two sentences to us, and we take those one or two or three sentences and kind of condense them, pull out the main points, and then we kind of use one of these sentence stems to start our reflection or our question. Bill, I hear you saying. So it sounds to me like it seems as if. So you're trying to make sure that you're, one, interpreting what they're saying in the way that they want you to interpret it, okay? It's a way to check in with your client to make sure that you're on the right track. It's a way to show them that you are hearing them correctly, that you're accurate in your understanding of what they're saying, that you're focused on the main ideas that they are interested in focusing on that day, that you're pulling out the right things in your memory, right? So we use paraphrasing kind of, again, throughout a counseling session over and over. Again, that's something that takes skill. What you don't want to do is parrot, right? Parrot probably wants a cracker. So if a client is saying to me, wow, I really had a hard day yesterday. I got into a car accident and I was 10 minutes late for work. And if I'm the counselor, am I going to say back, wow, it sounds like you really had a hard day yesterday. You got into a car accident and you were 10 minutes late for work? Yes, that's exactly what I said, Mr. or Mrs. Counselor. So, that's not really moving a conversation forward any. So you don't want to say exactly verbatim back or quote what a client is saying to you, or maybe sometimes that might be warranted. Again, we're not talking concrete terms here, but in general, you want to use your own words. Use the way that you would speak to a client rather than just repeating exactly what they said. Summarizing is different. Summarizing is when we're taking a large bit of information, a large bit of content that our client is sharing with us. Maybe it's that they went really in depth with a story about what happened to them last week, and it's 5 minutes later. That's a lot of information that's been dumped on you, and you want to take a minute to make sure that, again, you are pulling out the most important pieces of the story, reflecting in the right way, making sure that you are on track with the emotions that the client was experiencing in that moment. And so summarizing is basically taking a large amount of information, condensing into a smaller bit of information. It's something that you can do as a way to start out a session. This is a great way to start a session with a repeat client. So if a client comes in for a second session, sometimes we're like, oh geez, where do we start here? We've already done the intake. I can't kill 25 minutes asking them about demographic information or their life. What am I going to do for the next 50 minutes after I've said, hi, welcome to my office today? And so you can start out a session by summarizing what happened in the last session. Hey, good to see you again. I hope you're doing well today. Let me just take a second to review what we worked on last week and make sure that we're on the right page, and then we can kind of set some goals for this session and we can go from there. So you can do that at the beginning. Again, I'm using interview in the slides. Counseling session works fine for that too. And at the end, it can be really useful to summarize what happened during that time that you were meeting with the client or clients, to make sure that that you're, again, getting all the key points, that everybody's on the same page moving forward, and that you weren't off base somewhere. Believe me, if you're misinterpreting something that a client has said, if you didn't understand it in the way that they wanted you to understand it, they're going to correct you. They're going to say, you know what, no, that's not actually what I meant when I said that I really hate my sister. They're gonna offer some additional reflection or clarification. That's my experience. I don't know that I've ever said anything that I misinterpreted to a client and they just kind of let that slide. But doing it at the end can be incredibly useful, because what do you do after your clients leave? I could pause for 10 seconds, but I won't. you write up your case notes, right? And what you're writing in your case notes is a summarization of what happened. And so the last thing that you want to leave that moment with is a good understanding of what work was done with that client in that time that you spent with them. So it can be really useful to do at the end. And again, it's a nice way to just end a session, because sometimes you can naturally feel that something is concluded. There's no other questions you need answered. You feel like you're at a natural stopping point. You've assigned some homework, maybe. You've reviewed what the client's going to do in the next couple of weeks before they come back. You're ready to just kind of boot them out the door because it's time. But this is a nice way to say, it seems like, we've done a lot of work today. I'm really happy where we are right now. Let me just kind of reflect on what my takeaways were from the session, and if you feel good about it, then we can just, see if you want to set up another meeting for a couple weeks from now. And then you can offer the summarization and call it a day. So hopefully that's offers a little bit of an overview of what the key points are in terms of asking questions in the right way, encouraging our clients, always encouraging our clients, paraphrasing and summarizing, and we will continue to move forward and look at reflections of feelings, I think is what's coming up next for next week. And I think that's all I'm going to leave you with. There's a discussion board this week as well, and I'll see you all, talk to you all in the discussions.